All right, and we are live. It is episode 62 of the PHU Dynasty podcast. This time I'm joined with one of our favorite guests, our favorite guest by far, because we all love draft season. This is Charlie Campbell, lead draft analyst at walterfootball.com. Statistically, one of the best mock drafters. We've known Charlie for a long time from our days back at Pewter Report. And then Walter Football, of course, we all read very frequently throughout the draft season and throughout the regular season as well for all the fantasy stuff. Charlie, how are you doing?
I'm great. How you doing, Eric?
I'm hanging in there. It's getting to that peak time in draft season where all the news starts breaking out. It's smokescreen season actually now. This is right about that time where everything kind of gets all jumbled up in the top half of the first round, trying to figure out what quarterback's going where. So let's start right out the gate with the quarterbacks. And, this is an interesting group because there's, maybe 4 or 5 guys, maybe even 6 that could be considered first round picks. And with all of these rankings that you guys are seeing today are off of Charlie's big board, which was released a couple of days ago. Make sure you go and read that. Lots of interesting discussion to be had. And Charlie, would you call your big board your personal rankings, or would this be fed off of what you're hearing, or is it a little of both?
Yeah, both. Like my big board is, my opinion, but my mock drafts, I'm doing what I think a team will do, not what I think they should do necessarily. So I'm just trying to project how it will actually play out and throw my opinion on the players out the window. But the big board is, that's my opinion there. So that's why it looks pretty different from the consensus in terms of how I have the quarterbacks and then potentially other positions as well.
Yeah, so let's start right there with Drake May at the top over Caleb Williams. By all standards today, it seems like Caleb Williams is arguably number 1 or 2 on most people's boards, with Marvin Harrison kind of falling into that bucket as well. But here you have Drake May at number 1. What sets Drake May apart for you as opposed to a Caleb Williams? Why would you put him number 1 over Caleb?
Well, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, I think you would want Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels more than Drake May because they're going to provide more rushing and rushing touchdowns and whatnot. So, in terms of fantasy, those two would be ranked ahead of May. But for me on the big board, I'm just ranking football players for effectiveness and how I think they'll be in the NFL. And I think Drake May is safer than Caleb Williams, and Jaden Daniels. May has a good arm, very accurate, reads the field well, good size, has some athleticism. I think he's kind of a more athletic version of Jared Goff. And I think he's a safe pick to turn into a solid starter. Whereas Caleb Williams, I think, has some things he really needs to work on for the NFL. I'm not a big fan of the fit of him in Chicago. I think the fumbling issues are concerning. He holds the ball way too long, passes up open underneath receivers to try and make bigger throws downfield. That's a big thing he's going to have to clean up. He puts a lot of pressure on his offensive line because of how long he holds the ball, and that leads to him taking hits as well. So I think there's a lot there that he's going to have to change from college to pro. And I think Drake May is just a bit more traditional, but you kind of see the pathway where he's a safe pick to be a good starter given his arm talent, his accuracy, size, and athletic ability.
Yeah, I do think there are a little bit more question marks on Caleb. Has there been any discussion in maybe in NFL circles about Caleb Williams just from a person standpoint? Do they think that, it seems like a little bit more has come out just in terms of, maybe the fit culturally with some teams? Does Caleb Williams have any of those question marks heading into the draft or no?
Yeah, there are some teams that aren't a big fan of the personality and kind of question his mental toughness in a way and his ability to adapt to the NFL and be a pro. And handling an NFL locker room. So there's definitely teams that have concerns about that.
Yeah, so going a little bit further down the board here, JJ McCarthy at 38 on your big board, number 5 quarterback, with Bo Nix ahead of him on your ranking by just one slot. Obviously, JJ McCarthy is one of the most polarizing people this year in terms of the quarterback group. I have to ask the question, and based on your big board, I probably already know the answer, but is he worth a top 5 pick this year? Or are we looking at like another Will Levis situation from last year where maybe we're just hyping up a guy just to kind of fit the slots there in the top 5, and then maybe he eventually goes later than we're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I don't have him up there, but I do think someone's going to take him, high in the top 5. I think Minnesota's likely to trade up for him. I think Denver's a possibility as well. He has a good skill set with size and arm, but similar to Levis, I kind of question some of the passing instincts. And also with McCarthy, I think there's other parts of just throwing late across the middle of the field, throwing high across the middle of the field. I think he's best throwing outside the hashes and throwing kind of hitting that out route. But I think he really was a game manager in college. They didn't ask him to do a whole lot. He was in a ground-based offense that had a great defense over these years, and the Big Ten wasn't exactly a murderer's row in schedule and opponents he was facing. So he really had it pretty easy compared to, say, Jaden Daniels and playing in the SEC, or Drake May, who had a terrible supporting cast and had to do everything for his team. And Caleb Williams as well had to win a lot of shootout games over his career. So I think McCarthy definitely has the skill set to develop, but I think there's just more questions about how he translates, which is why I have him, in my opinion, he's more of a second round caliber player, but I know in the actual draft, he's gonna go in the top dozen picks for sure.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, do you think his floor is maybe that Broncos pick at 12 at this point? It just doesn't seem like he's going to make it out of the top 10, really.
Yeah, I think really, I think Minnesota is kind of looking at him or Drake May, depending on what New England does at 3, and whichever one the Patriots don't take, I think Minnesota will look to move up for.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Last quarterback question for you here. This is one from one of our league members. Michael Penix is considered QB 5 or 6 by most. Is his injury history and age the only thing knocking him down at this point? And he also added too, this is a pro style quarterback with a history of being able to, drop back from under center. So it does feel weird that he's lower, maybe than most think. So what are your thoughts on Michael Penix?
Well, I think Penix, the accuracy is inconsistent, and I think that's something that he's going to have to, really work on. And you can see it just in the 2 playoff games last year with where he absolutely destroyed Texas and was on fire in that game and threw a number of beautiful passes. And then against Michigan, he had just a horrible game, was missing some open receivers for big plays that could have really changed the course of that game. So the inconsistency to me is concerning as a passer. But I have heard, there was talk that and it was throughout the second half of the season, there were games where he struggled from an accuracy standpoint, and some attributed to a rib injury he was playing with, but he definitely needs to improve his footwork, and the footwork has a big impact on accuracy for a quarterback. So that is clear. He also needs to improve kind of reading coverages when they don't give him the obvious throw, it seems to give him some problems. What other teams, when they dropped 8 in coverage, that really seemed to fluster him a little bit. So I think he's a bit more developmental, but the age and the knees are a concern with teams to rebuild knees already. But there's so many teams that need a quarterback. He does have arm talent, throws an excellent deep ball, and that's very, enticing for a team that is lacking big plays and needs a starting quarterback. So in a long-term one. So a team like the Raiders, I think, would definitely be a team to watch for Penix.
Do you think there's any chance he goes in the first round this year? Or is it just maybe a little bit just too developmental of a player to take that high?
I think so. I think he's got the momentum right now, and from talking with people at teams, they think he has a shot at it for sure. I definitely feel that once you have those top four, the consensus top four off the board with May, Williams, Daniels, and McCarthy, then you're going to have a few teams like the Broncos potentially if they aren't trading up for one of those guys, then they have to figure something out between Knicks and Penix, and so they don't have a pick in the second round. So they're kind of forced to, if they trade back, maybe they could get a second round pick, but even then they can't be confident that another team won't take the quarterback that they want or trade up for them. Say like a team like maybe the Giants who are looking for, so they can't bank on that. So I do think that Penix and Bo Nix have a shot at going in the first round.
Yeah, it seems like those middle ground teams have a little bit more work to do in terms of pass catch or pass throwers, I should say. Let's go over to the running back position now. Definitely a down year from last year. It's pretty easy to see, I think, for most people. I did have a question on this one. Since there are no first round running backs, which back in this class has the best chance to be a special player? Maybe even in terms of fantasy, dynasty wise, like to be a 3-down back and to really put themselves in that top 15 back consideration. Do you see anybody like that this year?
Well, I think Blake Corum will be a 3-down starter for someone. I think he'll go in the second round most likely, and he's going to be a 3-down starter quickly in his career. And I think he'll be a solid pro starter. Might not be dynamic, but I do think he'll be a solid pro. And then I think a few other guys have skill sets that could turn them into nice value players for teams that draft them. Jonathan Brooks is big and has speed, and I think if it weren't for the ACL injury, he'd be probably an early second rounder, and projected to be a 3-down starter. So I still think that could be the case for him because he is really talented. I think Trey Benson also could be a player that turns into a 3-down starter. And a lot of these other guys, I think could have a shot at it, just depending on where they land and the situation they're in. Guys like Jalen Warren or Estime, Ray
I meant to put
Davis.
right in there, but I have Jalen Warren on my team, so I guess it
Yeah,
must be stuck
Jalen,
in my
right?
head.
Yeah, and then but Ray Davis, I think, is a sleeper, really good player that could turn into a 3-down starter, and it all depends kind of on where these guys land, who's ahead of them on the depth chart, how much longer that guy is going to be around, and uh, those kind of considerations are definitely going to have a big impact on. But I do think there's some sleeper talents there like Ray Davis, Braylon Allen, Bucky Irving, Estime Warren. So I think all those guys could be nice fantasy picks, but it's just going to depend on who drafts them and their situation they're in.
Yeah, so along the same lines, I'm looking at the running back position. Obviously, no first round pick probably, but how many running backs do you think will actually go on day two? So that would be rounds 2 and 3. Just by like looking at it, it feels like maybe like 4 or 5. But do you think something different?
Yeah, I was thinking about 5, maybe. a handful could go in there. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. If maybe you get one or two in the second round, and then you have a nice little group that goes in the third. And the third, you also have the extra comp picks as well. So between those and teams starting to draft kind of rotational backups at that point, I think you could see a little run on some running backs there in the third, fourth round.
So last question on the running back position, and this is something that as we were watching the draft last year, we were kind of surprised, but it seemed like you weren't, based on your pre-draft, notes, your stock reports and whatnot. Jahmyr Gibbs ended up going much higher than people originally had thought. The Lions were very high on him. So my question to you for this year: is there a player like a Jahmyr Gibbs that you want to say, call a sleeper perhaps, to go high in the first round in those top 16 picks? Do you see any player like coming off the radar like that this year in the discussions you've been having?
No, not this year. Yeah, I knew a lot of teams were really high on Gibbs and felt he was one of the best players in the draft, regardless of position. So the media was kind of behind on that one. They didn't really realize where teams were valuing Gibbs, and they also didn't, they kind of, I think, got looped into the narrative of running backs will slide and running backs were, uh, not as important and all that kind of stuff. Teams aren't as big of believers in that as the media kind of makes it out, and they want good players, elite talent, guys that can make big plays and lead them to wins. So players like Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs are great players in any draft class, and that's why why they both went high last year. But this year doesn't have any guys like that. So I think Corum has a shot at going high in the second round, but I think that's kind of the ceiling for this group of running backs.
Yeah, nothing too crazy this year. It seems like, at least at the running back position. Receivers definitely are going to be the big show that we see on night one of the draft this year. It could be as many as 6, 7, depending on how you look at it and how these teams view it. So I guess that's my first question for you: are you seeing a 6 or a 7 going in the first round, or do you think it cuts off maybe a little bit more sharply than it appears? It just feels like it's a very deep group, so maybe there won't be as many in the first round. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I think there'll be at least five, and I think six is, if I was gonna bet on it, I would bet on six going in the first round, and I do think uh, a seventh isn't impossible based on kind of the other positions in the draft and looking at the teams picking late in the first round. I don't think it's impossible to have those top seven receivers go there. But
And
I do think we'll have five of them for sure, and six likely, and seven not likely but possible.
yeah, I love a lot of these receivers this year. To me, it's a very clear top three, and I think it is to most people. Depending on how you want to go about your 2, 3, that's kind of the big debate right now. But it seems like you have Malik Neighbors at 1, or I should say 2, on your big board over Marvin Harrison at 5. Is that a result of kind of what you're hearing, or do you really think that Malik Neighbors is the better NFL projection at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some team people that like Neighbors more than Harrison, and some like Harrison more than Neighbors, but I mean, it's really close. It's
Hmm.
closer than kind of the media, I think, realizes. And for me, I prefer Neighbors more myself, just from a separation standpoint, where Neighbors just is a faster player, just has more explosiveness, and I think he's gonna uh, have an edge over Harrison in terms of being a guy that consistently generates separation. I think Harrison's going to be a really good pro, but he doesn't have the speed of Neighbors. So that's why I have Neighbors rated ahead of him.
Yeah, I'm a big Neighbors supporter as well at this point. I mean, he's very explosive. He kind of gives I look at Harrison kind of like more like a DeAndre Hopkins type. Maybe not quite as explosive, but clearly gets the separation that he needs. And when he doesn't, he can make the contested catch. Whereas Neighbors might be a little bit more of like a Jamar Chase type, where he can win with that explosiveness. So I do agree. I don't think it's as far apart as people might make it seem right now. But from a fantasy standpoint, I don't think you can go wrong with either one of these guys. Or the third guy here, Roma Dunze. If Roma Dunze is available at 9 to the Bears, do you think they would stick and pick, or could you see a team moving up with the Bears given that they have a lack of draft capital in the rest of this draft?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because without a second round pick, that I could see the Bears being inclined to trade down for sure. But they also want edge rush talent to go across from Montez Sweat, and if they trade down, this isn't a great class of edge rushers, so they risk losing out on really getting a first round pass rusher to go with Sweat. So they're kind of in a tough position there. But they made that bet when they traded that second round pick for Montez Sweat. They thought they were going to recoup it when Justin Fields, but that trade market just never materialized. And they could have just held on to that second round pick and signed Sweat or John Grenard or Donnell Hunter, someone like that, and Chase Young's in free agency, and they'd still have that second round pick right now. So I think that was a bit of a blunder by the Bears. But that being said, I'm not sure a team would trade up for Odunze, in part because there are good receivers here after him. So legit first rounders. I could see where they would. Sorry, I just got a text from a source. But yeah, I mean, the skill set on Brian Thomas Jr. is phenomenal. In terms of just sheer size, speed, he might be the most the most complete package, just in terms of play, on a field with no defense. He's not as good a receiver as Neighbors or Harrison or Dunze in terms of polish and route running and kind of all the tricks of the trade. He needs a lot of work on that stuff, but he's big and fast and has God-given ability that you can't coach. So I think there's going to definitely be teams that like what that kind of mold of clay to work with in him. Worthy has game-breaking speed, as we've all seen, and it's not just track speed, because if you watch him at Texas, it just jumps out at you how fast this guy is. And A.D. Mitchell, another guy, and A.D. Mitchell and Leggett both are big and fast, have good size and speed combinations. So there's going to be some really nice values in the second day as well. So I'm not sure teams will be as willing to trade up for a receiver high in the first round, because I think they might look at it as we can stay where we are and still get a good player and hold on to these other picks.
Yeah, it seems like so deep that you don't want to like kind of use these picks to move up when you could get yourself a really quality player. I mean, to me, this draft might be one of the deepest since maybe 2014, when you got guys like Roman Wilson at 71 on your big board. Whereas if you put Roman Wilson in the draft last year, he might even be like a fringe first, second round pick, depending on how you look at it. But all these guys compared to like a Quentin Johnson last year in that top 6, it feels like Quentin Johnson would be an obvious second round pick in this year's draft.
Right.
So pretty deep class. And then to kind of round out your point on that top 6, so do you think that Brian Thomas truly is that number 4 guy, and is it unquestioned in that he's the top of that second tier of receivers, or do you think maybe one of these other guys, maybe even like a Keon Coleman, could sneak into the first round? I'm a little bit torn on Keon Coleman. I don't know what to think. Obviously, the combine was a little bit of a question with his 40 time, but he makes some of the craziest catches that I've ever seen on tape. So I don't really know what to think about Keon Coleman. Is he in that second bucket?
Yeah, I think in terms of Brian Thomas, Worthy, and AD Mitchell, it's going to be really kind of it'll vary amongst teams and kind of the scheme and who they like and what they want and so I don't think it's a real like defined order that they're going to come off the board. I think after the top three you're and into the rest, like you said, with Keon Coleman and Pearsall and Lad McConkey, you're going to have variety from team to team on where they're putting these guys. And also, some team, say like the Lions picking late in the first round, could use an X receiver. So that might mean they'd be more inclined to like a Leggett or a Coleman as opposed to a slot receiver like a McConkey, so it really is going to vary on the team, and I don't think the Lions are going to take a receiver in the first round, but who knows? It's possible, and the Bills, obviously, that's a big decision for them. Do we want an X receiver? Do we want a slot receiver? Do we want a guy that can just fly, or do we want a bigger possessional guy who's going to be able to do dirty work underneath and help us on third and intermediate? So those it's really going to vary by team for that group, and then Keon Coleman, I think if he had ran well at the combine, would have had a shot at going in the first round. But that 4.6 time is just a killer for going in the first round. So I do think he'll go in the second round, and I know a bunch of teams that like him and are hoping that he's going to be there at their pick. So I would be surprised if he fell out of the second round, but I think that given the speed, he won't go in the first, but I do think he could turn into a really good pro. There have been plenty of other receivers that didn't have great 40s, but were really good pros. So, it's not the end all be all, as we all know who follow the draft.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you got 10 receivers in your top 43. It's a crazy class for sure.
Hmm.
The only other question that I had on the rookie receivers might be a player that it seems like you might be a little bit lower on than the general media. Troy Franklin at your 14 spot, 75th overall on your big board. I came away watching his tape feeling maybe a little bit underwhelmed as opposed to some of these other guys in that top 60 that you have. I feel like he might be a little bit just less impressive in terms of his size and maybe his stature. Is that kind of what you're feeling too on Troy Franklin as opposed to these other guys?
Yeah, I just haven't heard the teams as high on him as the some of the media has projected, and Tez Walker as well. I think both of those two are very similar, and they're both kind of Robbie Anderson type receiver, Robbie Chosen, or Chosen Anderson. I don't know what it is now, but they're both that kind of receiver where they're tall, very lean, have some speed to get vertical, but there's limitations there in terms of getting off jams and being thinner framed guys. So as a result, I think they're more definite late second, third rounders as opposed to being potential first rounders like you've seen, elsewhere. Franklin's been, in some first rounds of mock drafts, especially, but I just haven't heard teams as high on him, and I just haven't, like you said, Eric, watching him on tape, just feel like translating to the NFL, there could be some issues there, and he might be just more of kind of a rotational receiver where you try and maximize the strength, but he's not going to be this high volume number one receiver at the pro level.
Yeah, I'm a little bit skittish if that's what you're trying to get him to do at the NFL level. Is there a sleeper on this list that you would bet on? If maybe not the first 6 or 7 guys, but from 8 to 21 here, is there somebody that you would really feel good about drafting later on?
Well, I definitely think that group of 8, 9, and 10 of Coleman, Pearsall, and McConkey. I think all three of those are going to be good pros, and produce well for their NFL teams. And after that, I like Polk and Roman Wilson. I think Polk's been a little underrated, in part because of Odunze being there. I think kind of covers up that he was a really nice player at college football. I think Roman Wilson could be a really dangerous slot receiver at the pro level. Um, I think later on there, you have some other guys with, could be nice sleepers that are rotational wideouts, and Brennan Rice, Aeneas Smith, uh, and I think that even those last guys there, Stoops, Ryan Fulnoy, and McCaffrey are all sleepers that could be, nice competitive rotational wideouts for their pro teams.
Nice. Yeah. So this year will be a little bit different at the tight end class than last year. I feel like um, we have one guy at the top, pretty obviously, Brock Bowers. I'm really looking forward to seeing where he gets drafted. I feel like he has a chance to be a real difference maker. One of these guys that is maybe in that Kyle Pitts category of prospects going in the top five. Do you think? Actually, let me rephrase the question. Where do you think the floor is for Bowers? From what I can tell, I feel like 15 with the Colts. That seems like kind of their kind of guy, and I just don't really see him going later. But do you think that the whole Kyle Pitts saga that has gone on since he's been drafted at the Falcons maybe diminishes his stock a little bit this year? But where do you see him fitting, and where do you think his floor is?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Pitts, I mean, people acknowledge the talent is there. It's just the quarterback play was so bad in
It was very bad.
Atlanta that it's hard to really put it on him when they just could had no semblance of any quality passing offense, and it hurt all their players. Drake London, Bijan Robinson as a receiver, he was a fantastic receiver at Texas that they didn't get much out of him as they should have in the receiving game. So. Yeah, I don't think that'll be held against Bowers too much, and I think Bowers is like you said. I think top 15 for sure. I think the Colts are about as low as he could go. I think the Saints, a few picks ahead of them, would be in play for them. They need another weapon for Derek Carr. And then of course the Jets at 10. From what I've heard, they're high on Bowers and Odunze. But if they don't trade down, that those could be their top two targets. And I think he'll be a really good pro. He's always going to be limited as a blocker because he's undersized, but he does give an effort as a blocker, which is a big part of it. Teams they don't need their tight ends to really kick ass. They just want them to get draws, and just get a draw for us, and we'll be good. And he fights his tail off to get that. So I don't think he's going to be like one of these guys that gets pulled all the time because of blocking. So I think he'll be a 3-down starter, like Sam Laporta. I think Laporta's a bit better as a blocker than Bowers entering the NFL, but they're similar sized guys, and I think he could have a quick impact like Laporta did last year.
Yeah, Laporta was a stud, and he was part of that, second bucket of tight ends last year in a deep class. This year's not nearly as deep, to my knowledge. Outside of maybe JT Sanders there in the second round, second, third round, is there any other guys that could potentially have a fantasy dynasty impact? It seems like I think I read on one of your articles recently that Ben Sinnott might be coming up the boards a little bit, perhaps, or maybe people are starting to wake up in the media to him maybe going higher than expected.
Yeah, I think the guys that could be worth keeping an eye on as they develop might not be worth a pick at this point, especially. But keep an eye on Cade Stover from Ohio State, Ben Sinnott from K State, Theo Johnson from Penn State, and Jaheim Bell from Florida State, and see where they land. See, who the tight end is there. If those guys all have some receiving ability and upside as receivers. So I think that where they land will be important. But and especially Jaheim Bell, no one's going to draft him for his blocking because he's not a big guy. But he does have some receiving ability and athletic ability as well as, and you saw it, and when they used him in some running back as well. That rushing touchdown he had against LSU was vicious. So I think he's a kind of sleeper to keep an eye on because whoever drafts him probably has a plan to use him as some kind of F movement receiving tight end in a package. So I'd keep an eye on him.
Yeah, he's one of the guys I marked as just if he could find a spot, maybe keep an eye on it because he definitely has athletic talent that some of these other guys maybe don't have. Charlie, it's been really great to have you here. I did want to ask, where can, obviously we know where to find you, but what's coming up in the next maybe week to 2 weeks here from Charlie Campbell on walterfootball.com? And then when can we expect your final mock draft? Because I know most people in this league and outside of our league really look forward to your mock drafts every year. So what's the plan?
Yeah, so obviously on Walter Football, and then you can follow me on Twitter at Draft Campbell. So soon I'll be finishing the position review articles, and those can be helpful from a fantasy perspective, where I'm kind
I
of
love them.
ranking prospects last year and this year, kind of ranking players by attribute. So kind of looking at them in a bit of a different way. So the last couple of those should be going up, but I think the fantasy ones are already up. The quarterback, running back, receiver ones have already been posted. So those, and then of course I'll be updating the big board and position rankings, throughout these final couple weeks, and a mock draft each week. Then the week of the draft, my mock gets updated every day, and the final one comes out Thursday morning, the day of the draft. So I'm typically pulling a late night writing until 2, 3, 4 in the morning that day before the draft, and trying to talk to as many league people as I can that night. And there's some stuff. Sometimes I get information and I already have stuff that I have to sit on and not write or put in my mock until that final one, just to protect guys and try and not, reveal things that are too sensitive too early. So my final mock definitely has a lot of I guess you could say kind of Easter eggs in there, potentially. But yeah, I'll be working like crazy over the next 3 weeks, and should be really exciting and interesting final few weeks of the draft season.
Yeah, we're always looking forward to Draft Campbell during this time of year. This is one of our favorite times to read Walter Football, specifically around this time, and I'm always looking forward to that final mock draft. So, and that's when all the good nuggets seem to pop out too. So we're all
Yeah,
here for it.
and yeah, and definitely you guys can email me if you want. It's draftcampbell@gmail. So I answer emails there from readers and everyone. So feel free to give me a shout there, or that's probably better than sending me a direct message on Twitter, because that's just hard to keep track of all that
Yeah,
junk.
there's
So
I'm sure there's plenty of people
so
coming to you on Twitter. So
so yeah, Gmail's kind of the best way for me to definitely see it and respond.
there you go, guys. You heard it here first. If you have your draft questions, get them in. It's a great time of year. Charlie, thanks again for hopping on. I know you're super busy right now, so we definitely appreciate your time.
Of course, great talking with you guys, and take care, Eric, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll be talking up through the draft.
All right, sounds really good. Charlie Campbell from walterfootball.com, everyone. We'll see you next time on the PSU Dynasty podcast.